Hey everybody, good to see you. I'm here in Montana, Livingston, Montana, on vacation with my family, and I've been contemplating the back-to-back shootings that happened literally on the day that I was flying was the first one, and then while I was sleeping that night was the second one, or just after I went to bed. And I just wanted to share with you my thoughts. We're all searching for answers right now. And some of us are searching to the hidden answers, the road less traveled, the things that we've overlooked maybe as a society. Others are pretty much just, they're so over it, they're so tired of it, they're repeating a lot of talking points. On the left, we've been hearing a lot about how the NRA is causing these shootings through their advocacy of gun rights for law-abiding citizens. And that's not a spin, it's just more of an attempt to get you to kind of break through the rhetoric. Okay, there's that. And then there's the whole thoughts and prayers thing, which has been around for at least a couple of years, because when I wrote my article on guns last year, I used that as an example of how people don't hear what the other side is saying. One side sarcastically posts about thoughts and prayers and fuck you, excuse my language, and the other side says it's too soon to politicize this event, too soon. And the media, well, it depends. You know, the media is not a monolithic automaton. So I wanted to address a couple things. Number one, video games and film. Now, I don't know if you remember, but when Hillary Clinton was running for president in 2008, she made some remarks about doing something about video games and their effect on mass shootings. And I was on some message board, it wasn't Facebook, and I just happened to see a lot of gamers wishing death upon her and cussing her out and saying that everybody knows the studies have shown. Or, I played video games and I turned out fine. I know when to distinguish reality from imagination, right? So it was actually Scott Adams who created Dilbert that helped me see this. Number one, the amount of people who might actually act on all the images of violence that he was subjected to for so long that they've been subjected to for so long, the person who would act that out is very, 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 very small. So are mass shootings compared with the other homicides and gun deaths that are not mass shootings in the country and the world. So what I'm saying is, it's not scientific, obviously, to say I played a bunch of video games my whole life and I turned out okay. Number one, okay, that's not scientific. And number two, those studies, you got to look at how many studies, and you got to look at what they used as their sample, what they used as a control, how the experiment was conducted, what their hypothesis was, what was the question they were asking, was the study peer-reviewed, was it ever refuted, etc., 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 etc. And so the problem with these narratives is that many people, especially those who have a vested interest in the issue, decide that this is settled. It's settled, right? Video games do not cause people to act on violent fantasies of shooting, maiming, dismembering, and killing. Okay, got it. So then I can't say anything about this. Can't revisit it, can't do a new study, nothing, right? That just doesn't, that doesn't even make sense, right? Because science is constantly evolving. There's constantly new information coming up. So then, if we want to just put aside all those talking points that I've brought up, and we want to talk about, we just want to talk about the whole issue. We think about what it's like to be born onto this earth and grow up here And I think as I've been going around the country and talking to my friends and just going about my business, I've talked to a lot of people who say they were scared for their entire life, scared to death because they walked into the room when their parents were watching The Shining or a horror movie or another horror movie or just what have you. And we also all know that we are all bombarded by things that we don't understand, especially violence. And not just people dying, but graphic, detailed, noisy, gratuitous, extended scenes and reenactments of violence from the time we can see, from the time that we could see a television screen and that we can hear, even maybe in the womb. Some may laugh and say, oh, that's ridiculous. None of this stuff is evil. So, I even had a family member say that he would show a baby anything sexual and anything violent and be confident that it wouldn't affect the kid, either a baby up to, 12 years old. So, it's really hard to break through except by remembering what it was like for you to be a child. Remember before you decided that it was funny, that before you decided that your response to violence would be to laugh at it. Like when I saw Goodfellas, I think I was 18, and I learned that you're supposed to laugh. So I decided to laugh, and of course it had some funny scenes, but we laughed it all the way through with the guy in the trunk and everything. And so, of course, crime and mob movies and James Bond, all that, they're part of our national culture. And that's fine, but if we really want to meditate on what it was like to be a child and our earliest memories and our hopes and dreams for how the world is and how our lives were going to be, and as we are slowly and continuously desensitized to the point where we observe, we learn, and we notice that humans are miserable. We all talk a good talk about parties and summers and barbecues, and we do all that. But we also reach this point of disappointment as we hear all of the things going on in the news when we're children. And I am not saying we should hide that from them, but the first time you hear about, or the first time you see someone dying on TV and you don't even have any idea what's make-believe and what's real. My son really helped me with that. He had no idea that hardly anything was real that was coming out of the TV. He had no idea. So if you don't have any experience with the material world, you're not going to know when something is real and when something is not. So I'm getting down to really, really basic levels here. But the bombardment that we do experience when we are born into this world is truly mind-boggling. And I'm not saying that we're a bad society. I'm not blaming anyone. I'm saying, we have a violent core that is the instinct for survival, and it's a powerful, powerful tool, and it involves the reptilian brain that is at the center of everyone's brain before it became a higher functioning brain, and that's purely for survival. And so we've been evolving, and so I really believe that empathy, the ability to feel what someone else is feeling, I really believe that empathy is a higher function. It's an evolved function. It may even involve a more of a spiritual or multidimensional function. And so when we kill, the biggest thing missing is empathy. In the past, it was kill or be killed. Kill or be killed. I went to the Genghis Khan exhibit here at the Museum of the Rockies in Bozeman yesterday, and I actually had time to read all of the plaques and the different multimedia presentations that they had, and I was shocked and stunned to realize that this man who united all the tribes, not only in his native Mongolia, but then proceeded to branch out in the largest land empire the world has ever known, that it even says he wiped out whole populations. Yes, that's quite a thing to say. It wasn't like he killed 100 people or he, destroyed a city. He wiped out populations. But when he was coming up and assuming leadership and uniting all the tribes, he's the one who ended the practice of killing all your war prisoners. Instead, he made one of them his commander. So because he wasn't as evil as everybody else, he was there and he rose to the occasion for the evolution of our species. But obviously we're not in Genghis Khan's times anymore. But in order to survive and in order to make a mark and start the ball rolling on codifying the rule of law, etc., 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 as opposed to revenge killing and blood feuds, which, by the way, that is why the tribes were warring. They were locked in an endless cycle of blood feuds and revenge killing. So he established the rule of law, and this is why the rule of law is so important. If you're able to manipulate the law, you're descending, you're devolving rather than evolving. So, getting back to empathy, obviously, we don't have a need to kill or be killed. In fact, hardly ever or at all, because you have defensive weapons now that can hopefully disable the person, and then if they still keep coming, you can ram them in the thorax. But so I just wanted to say that it's funny seeing people argue back and forth about whether it's mental health or video games and violent movies or racist ideology, extremist ideology, condoning of political violence, even talking about a problem that's going on in the country that happens to involve people who are breaking the law. But since the act of breaking the law has been so encouraged for the last 50 years, then it's just considered racist to even talk about it. So, I'm just asking that we approach this problem from a holistic point of view. As I've written about, I was absolutely for, universal background checks, and Senate Republicans are causing the deaths of children. And then I started really looking into it, and background checks are universal. They're instant. It's the national instant background check that the FBI runs in West Virginia. And you're supposed to report all state, local, and city records there with the law, with breaking the law, and also mental health and education records. But unfortunately, every state is different regarding which agencies report, and it costs money to report, and also there are privacy concerns. So, almost all of the shooters of the last 5 to 7 years bought guns, passed a background check, but really they had prior dealings with law enforcement and mental health professionals and government people that there should have been a way to catch them. So now I want to move on to this idea of white supremacy. The idea that the last 2 shootings were evidence added to all the shootings from and killings from this year were showing that white nationalists are our biggest threat. So I had missed the FBI report that came out about a week ago, and so I just went back to find it. And all I can tell is that Christopher Wray, who was appointed by Trump after after Comey was fired, the acting director of the FBI, he testified before Congress recently, one of the committees, and the headline in the Washington Post, which is where everybody else took their stories from, the headline says, okay, I'll be right there, honey. Headline says 100 arrests have been made of domestic terrorists, white nationalist domestic terrorists, and then it proceeds to go into the numbers. Now, It proceeds to say that there were 150 arrests in 2017, 120 arrests in 2018, and 100 arrests so far in 2019. Well, later on, the spokeswoman for Christopher Wray had to clarify to the Washington Post reporter, as well as the world, that there were 90 arrests for domestic terrorism. And Christopher Wray had said that most of them were white nationalists. But as I've looked at a lot of FBI crime statistics recently, I know that there's always different motivations. There's racial motivation, there is religious motivation or anti-religion, there's an animus toward varying groups. And so the spokeswoman had to clarify and say, no, of the domestic terrorism arrests that involved a racial motive, the majority were believed to be white supremacist. So Washington Post clarified that at the end of the lead, but didn't say what the numbers actually were, just said that the spokeswoman had clarified. But then, as you get further and further toward the bottom, you realize it was 90 domestic arrests. Oh, and the lead had said that there was a definite uptick, but the year's not over. And even if it seems like we're on track to have more because it's August, you still can't say it represents an uptick unless you qualify it with same period last year, same period. And so that's misleading. The other thing was that just the raw numbers of arrests are very, very, very small. And it was 100 international terrorism arrests. So these are arrests, these aren't incidents or killings. It's just really important to kind of lock into your brain what is the parameter that we are looking at. So anyway, long story short, the Washington Post had a correction at the very end of their article about FBI Acting Director Wray's testimony before Congress. Little tiny sentence at the very bottom of this article that said that the headline and the article had been updated to clarify, to include the comments from Christopher Wray's spokeswoman, who had to clarify his comments. And again, I already told you, it's hi there. It's that what he was clarifying was they really it's not the majority of all domestic terrorist cases that include white nationalism involve white nationalist perpetrators. It's the majority of domestic terrorist arrests that involve any racial animus. They think of those, the majority are white supremacists. Well, right there, we have to look at how, is this drastically different year over year? No, we're talking 90 arrests so far up till August this year. We're talking 150 arrests total in 2017, and we're talking 120 arrests in 2018. This is a very, very small number of arrests for the entire nation. So, as I've made a study of mass shootings, it's absolutely not every single one is white, and if they are, they're not all right-wing. Is right-wing extremism a problem? Yes. It's a serious problem. Is left-wing extremism a problem? Yes. I don't believe there's been an Antifa member who's killed, who's done a mass shooting. I know that they're saying that the Dayton shooter, that he was a supporter of Elizabeth Warren, and he supported a lot of left-wing causes on Twitter and a lot of left-wing celebrities. But to me, that doesn't make his horrific act an act of left-wing terrorism. No, the guy was a member of a band that wrote lyrics and songs about raping and cutting and dismembering women. Messed up. So if you want to sit there and criticize the president for talking about mental health, or criticize any politician who tries to talk about gaming and violent TV and movies, which is literally everywhere, and you want to get angry, well, just stop yourself right there, because this issue is monumentally complex. Also, I pulled up the yearbook photos. I wanted to get all yearbook photos of the Gilroy Garlic shooter Festival shooter, the El Paso shooter, and the Dayton shooter. And I could only get yearbook portraits for the first two, the Gilroy Garlic Festival shooter and the El Paso shooter. And not only are they both wearing tuxedos that look identical, but they could be brothers. Twins, actually. I can see the difference, but they could be brothers. And it's just, the first one, the Garlic Festival one, he was from a pretty prominent family. Quite prominent. I'm surprised that wasn't put out there. And then the guy who was killing people outside the, that bar, whatever that's called, apparently someone asked him, why are you doing this? Or that might have been at the Garlic Festival. I don't know. They both look alike. And he said, because I'm very, very angry. And then the third guy was hearing voices for at least 7 years before this. He talked to his girlfriend from 7 years ago. She told one reporter, and he said he was really afraid he was going to hurt someone someday. So you want to get mad at the president for talking about the fact that we need to fix mental health? And by the way, I think it would really benefit all of us to do more research and less debating and abusive behavior on Facebook, because, you know, I actually one day looked into the whole mental health situation where most of us believe that Reagan emptied the mental hospitals, and he changed everything for the worse, which caused the homeless epidemic, and this is all Reagan's fault because they're not getting enough help. And man, after reading for about 8 hours, everything I could get on this thing, I realized something. First of all, even if there was a narrative about Reagan, it's impossible that that would be the only cause of our messed up mental health system. Absolutely impossible. And in fact, every president has done something, and it was really hard to predict what it was going to do, how it would help or not. John F. Kennedy even did something. He helped push a bill through to create community health centers, which ended up being, I don't know, they were terrible for the situation. They did not work. They were underfunded after he was assassinated. So, I mean, we're all learning about how you can have a law and think everything is great and hunky-dory, and you realize it didn't get funded. I mean, this stuff is complicated. Not to mention the fact that we have so much corruption that nobody knew about. The United States is number one in not having corruption. I read it in the New York Times. Well, yeah, that can happen when nobody's watching and minding the store. So, anyway, I hope that it all comes out, and corruption's everywhere. So, I just wanted to say that it's mental health. It's violent images bombarding us from the moment we leave the womb. It's a lack of human contact. It's busy parents. It's not just one thing, so I'm not saying that anyone should feel bad, but it's us not talking to each other. It's babies who don't have a bond with anyone, let alone their mother, between 0 and 2, which is pretty much a death sentence for your empathy. And on and on and on. And the thing also that we need to keep in mind is if someone is a murderer, they're not necessarily mentally ill. Criminally insane is totally different from having a mental disorder. Criminally insane means they did not know right from wrong when they committed the crime. It's amazing how many misconceptions we have in our society. So, people who talk about mental health with these mass shootings, we're probably mostly talking about people who are psychotic, people who have hallucinations, and only if they really are. I mean, there are criminals and mass shooters who are not psychotic, but when you hear that there might be a pattern of somebody hearing voices, which more than one of these shooters has over the years been hearing voices, then you look into it. You don't sit there and get mad because They're not addressing the gun issue. And by the way, I would love to keep the guns out of any of these perpetrators' hands over the last few years. Love to. I'd love to have biometric locks and safes. Parents especially. Like the mom of that 20-year-old, I don't even want to say his name, the Sandy Hook shooter. So I'm all for that, and it's just that we aren't funding our record systems in the country. We have a patchwork of privacy concerns throughout the country, but there are these things called red flag laws. They passed it in California after the Santa Barbara shooter, that Asian guy who shot a bunch of people at UCSB or somewhere in Santa Barbara. They passed a thing called red flag laws, and that is if a family member or a close relative, friend, acquaintance feels that somebody is unstable, they can actually go and get a hearing before a judge, and they can have them temporarily barred from obtaining weapons, so that the rule of law is still there. There's an evaluation, and so the person gets seen. And but that's not that's like kind of an advanced way of trying to figure out who might do something. And who would know that? The people that know that person best. You always wonder, why didn't the family do anything? But we're so fragmented and we're so divisive in how we can even talk about this problem. How are we even supposed to solve it? But these red flag laws do seem like a good idea. Thanks for watching, and I just hope that we can all heal, because we're really hurting right now. We really are. So even if you really disagree with someone, maybe listen more. I try to find out what makes people tick, even if my instinct is just jump down their throat or shut them down. Oh my God, it's like, if their opinion gets out on the internet, people might start agreeing with them. No, that's not going to happen right away. So I think you should concentrate more on learning why that person is saying what they're saying. What experience did they have? Ask them. That's how I've been finding out a lot. Thanks a lot. Have a good week, everybody. Let me know in the comments what you think too. It really helps me when you do that. And if you like this, please subscribe to Back to Facts, both here on Facebook and on YouTube, Instagram, and Twitter. Thanks. Bye.